Pause for a moment before you move on to anything else. Before your attention shifts to the next thing competing for your focus, I want you to stay with me and truly hear what is being said. This is not a message about your value being denied, your purpose being questioned, or your future being withheld. The warning is aimed at something else entirely, something that could quietly interfere with what is trying to unfold in your life right now. There are moments that seem ordinary while they are happening, yet later become the dividing line between one season and the next. What stands before you may be one of those moments. The reason this message carries such urgency is because some opportunities only reveal their significance after they have passed, and by then all that remains is the realization that something important was overlooked when it first appeared. There is a specific arrangement taking shape in your life, one that has been developing far longer than you can see from where you stand today. Timing, relationships, circumstances, and resources have been moving into position in ways that may seem unrelated on the surface, yet they are part of a larger pattern. What is unfolding is not random. There is intention behind it, and there is movement happening beneath what appears visible. At the same time, there is something working against that movement. The danger is rarely loud, dramatic, or obvious. More often it arrives through a familiar reaction, a response you have repeated so many times that it feels automatic. It slips in quietly, disguising itself as wisdom, caution, or common sense. And because it feels familiar, it often goes unquestioned. When people speak about divine opportunities, the idea is sometimes used so broadly that it loses its meaning. What I am describing is something far more specific. It is not a test designed to measure your worth, nor a challenge placed in front of you to prove yourself. It is an alignment of circumstances prepared to move you from one stage of your journey into another, a threshold that separates who you have been from who you are becoming. Many of these moments do not arrive with dramatic signs or unmistakable announcements. They often appear through simple conversations, unexpected invitations, quiet decisions, or messages that seem ordinary at first glance. The significance is rarely found in the appearance of the moment itself. It is revealed later through the direction your life takes because you recognized it and stepped toward it. What makes these moments so important is that they carry more than a new opportunity. They carry growth, perspective, and authority that can only be gained by walking through them. There are things waiting on the other side of certain passages that cannot be received any other way. That is why the resistance is often hidden inside the experience, rather than surrounding it from a distance. As we continue, I want you to pay attention to the patterns that feel familiar. Not the most dramatic examples or the ones that sound impressive, but the ones that touch something real inside your own story. The obstacles that cause people to miss these moments are rarely identical because they are shaped around personal history, personal wounds, and the places where past experiences still carry emotional weight. The first pattern appears when something meaningful arrives in ordinary clothing. There is no overwhelming confirmation, no extraordinary feeling announcing its importance. It looks similar to things you have seen before. A door opens quietly. An opportunity appears without fanfare, and because it lacks the intensity you expected, a thought emerges that says, if this were truly significant, surely I would feel more than this. So the moment is acknowledged, but only at the surface level. The deeper invitation remains untouched. The person moves through the experience without fully entering it, and later realizes there was more available than they understood at the time. The second pattern grows out of an old wound that still carries influence in the present. Something about the current opportunity resembles a previous disappointment, a season where trust led to pain, or where hope ended in loss. The memory remains close enough to shape perception, and before long the past begins speaking louder than the present moment. The resistance does not always arrive through doubt about God or questions about your worth. Sometimes it simply points back to what happened before and reminds you how much it cost. Acting from what feels like reasonable self-protection, you step away from something that may have required courage to embrace. The wound is real, and the instinct to guard yourself is understandable, yet the timing of that reaction can change everything. The third pattern appears when a process that requires patience becomes pressured by urgency. What is being built is often unfolding in stages, each one preparing the ground for the next. Yet impatience begins whispering that if this were truly meant for you, it would be happening faster. Gradually, the focus shifts from trusting the process to measuring the speed, and the tension created by that comparison starts to influence every decision. Sometimes a person reaches a place where progress seems slower than expected, and that delay begins to feel unbearable. Instead of staying with the process, they either walk away believing nothing is happening, or they start pushing events forward before the season is ready. What was meant to unfold in a certain order becomes strained by impatience, and the very rhythm that could have carried them forward is disrupted by the need to make something happen immediately. The fourth trap is more subtle than the others because it often arrives wearing the appearance of an answer. Before the deeper work of the journey has finished, something appears that resembles the promise itself. It may look close enough to satisfy the longing, close enough to quiet the hunger, that was meant to keep the person moving through the full process. And that is what makes it so difficult to recognize. A relationship may appear before the maturity exists to sustain it. An opportunity for influence may arrive before the depth of character needed to carry it well. Even a financial breakthrough can seem like freedom while quietly creating new forms of dependence because the inner growth that was meant to accompany it has not yet been completed. What makes this trap so effective is that it rarely feels destructive. In fact, it often feels encouraging. The person receives something that appears to answer the need, and because the pressure eases, the deeper journey loses its urgency. Then, when the genuine opportunity arrives in its fullness, they no longer possess the readiness that the process was designed to build. The fifth trap takes a different approach. This one arrives through questions that sound intelligent, responsible, and spiritually mature. Just as the opportunity appears, a flood of reasoning begins asking whether it is truly significant, whether it is actually from God, or whether it is simply coincidence wrapped in hopeful thinking. This challenge is especially persuasive for those who value discernment and have spent years trying to walk carefully. They have seen people make reckless decisions while claiming divine guidance, and they genuinely want to avoid making the same mistake. Because of that, caution becomes easy to trust, even when caution is quietly preventing movement. What makes this trap difficult to identify is that it rarely sounds foolish. It often sounds wise. It presents itself as careful evaluation, responsible judgment, and spiritual maturity, yet its timing reveals its true purpose. It appears at the exact moment a step forward becomes possible and persuades the person to retreat while feeling convinced they made the responsible choice. So let me ask you something honestly. As you have listened to these patterns, which one stirred something familiar inside you? Not the one that sounded the most interesting or the most dramatic, but the one that immediately connected with a season you have lived through, or perhaps the season you are standing in right now. The reason for this warning is not that the opportunity before you is dangerous. The deeper issue is that these traps are often hidden within the very process meant to move you forward. Many sincere, capable, and devoted people never recognize what happened because they encounter the obstacle from inside the opportunity itself. That is why we need to look beyond the surface. Recognizing a pattern after it has already passed can bring understanding, but understanding alone does not change the outcome. What matters is learning to recognize the mechanism while it is unfolding. While the choice is still in front of you and the door remains open, there is a reason these patterns appear again and again throughout the stories of Scripture. When you study the journeys of people like Joseph, Ruth, Daniel, and the disciples on the road to Emmaus, a common thread begins to emerge. Different circumstances, different generations, different challenges, yet the same underlying dynamic continues to reveal itself. At the heart of every meaningful transition is a particular inner posture. It is a state of openness that remains available rather than guarded, attentive rather than closed, and that is precisely the condition these traps work hardest to interrupt. Because once that openness disappears, the ability to receive what is present becomes much harder to access. Think for a moment about the story of Elisha and his servant. Most people remember the dramatic moment when the servant's eyes were opened and he saw the heavenly armies surrounding them. It is a powerful image, but the deeper lesson begins before that moment ever happened. Both men were standing in the same place. They saw the same city, the same circumstances, and the same visible threat. Nothing about the external situation differed between them. The difference existed entirely in their ability to perceive what was already present. Elisha possessed an openness that allowed him to recognize a reality larger than the fear in front of him. The servant's attention, however, became consumed by what seemed dangerous, and that fear narrowed his vision until the threat was all he could see. The greater reality had not disappeared. His access to it had simply become restricted. When Elisha prayed, a new reality was not created. What was already there became visible. The provision, protection, and presence of God had been surrounding them from the beginning. The prayer opened the servant's capacity to receive what had been available all along. Sit with that truth for a moment. The answer was already present in the same place where the fear existed. The support he needed had not arrived late. It had been there from the beginning, waiting for his eyes to be opened to it. This is the pattern that exists within every divine setup. The opportunity is not waiting for you to become more worthy before it can appear. The arrangement has already begun taking shape. What matters is the condition of the receiver, because receptivity determines whether what is present remains hidden or becomes available. The resources, the timing, the people, and the provision may already be much closer than they appear. The difference between those who move through these moments transformed and those who miss them is often not the opportunity itself. More often, it is the inner capacity to recognize, receive, and respond to what has been placed before them. There is something important that many conversations like this tend to avoid, because it can feel uncomfortable to talk about openly. When a meaningful opportunity arrives and a person struggles to receive it, the reason is not always spiritual weakness. It is not proof that their faith is lacking, that they failed some hidden test, or that they were somehow less chosen than they believed. Often, there is a deeper reality at work, one connected to what prolonged pressure and stress do to the way a person processes what is happening around them. I want you to hold a question in your mind for a moment. Why does clarity sometimes arrive with such certainty and then seem to disappear just as quickly? Why can you feel deeply aligned with something in one moment, only to find yourself questioning it a few hours later? Why does a knowing that feels undeniable suddenly become difficult to access when you try to act on it? Many people have lived through this experience and assumed it reflected something wrong with them spiritually. Yet there are times when the struggle is much more practical than that. A person who has carried responsibility, disappointment, pressure, and emotional weight for a long season often finds that their ability to stay connected to what they initially sensed becomes weaker, even when their desire to follow God's direction remains sincere. I want to tell you about someone I will call Rachel. Her story is not unique because versions of it appear again and again in the lives of people who have spent years preparing for something they believed was coming. Rachel had devoted herself to growth. She had done the difficult work of healing old patterns, creating healthy disciplines, and clearing obstacles she knew were standing in her way. From every angle she could see, she was ready. Then an opportunity appeared, one that seemed connected to what she had been preparing for. Yet it arrived in a form she did not expect. It came through circumstances that felt unfamiliar, through people she would never have imagined playing a role in her journey, and without the confirmation she thought should accompany something truly significant. Because of that, she hesitated. Part of her dismissed the invitation because it did not resemble what she expected a meaningful opportunity to look like. Another part kept searching for validation from sources she trusted, and when that validation failed to arrive, she stepped back instead of stepping forward. The opportunity did not disappear forever, but the specific moment attached to it eventually passed. The timing shifted, the people involved changed. The unique convergence that existed in that season moved into a different form. What Rachel felt later was not dramatic regret, as much as a quiet grief. The realization that a particular version of something important had been available and would never return in exactly the same way. What stayed with her most was not the loss itself. It was the memory of what she felt during the first moments of the invitation. Long after the opportunity had passed, she found herself returning to that memory again and again not because she wanted to analyze it, but because something inside her still recognized the quality of what had been present before the questioning began. That detail matters more than most people realize. There was a deeper part of her that had recognized something significant immediately. Even after her reasoning dismissed it, that deeper awareness continued reaching back toward the original experience, almost as if it knew there had been more there than she allowed herself to receive. Rachel told me she sensed the significance almost immediately. Within minutes, she felt an inner certainty she could not fully explain. Yet she had no reliable way to remain connected to that certainty once analysis took over. By the time she finished evaluating every possibility and running the situation through all the filters she trusted, the original knowing had faded into the background. What remained was information without the depth that had first accompanied it. The conclusion eventually sounded reasonable enough. There was not enough evidence. There was not enough confirmation. There was not enough certainty. Yet the deeper awareness that had spoken first had already gone quiet. This is something worth understanding clearly. The initial knowing that sometimes arrives before the analysis begins is not necessarily random emotion or wishful thinking. In many cases, it is the clearest signal available in that moment. The challenge is not the quality of the signal itself. The challenge is the condition of the person receiving it. When someone has spent years carrying stress, pressure, and emotional strain, their ability to remain open to that deeper awareness becomes more fragile. The mind moves quickly to categorize, explain, compare, and evaluate. As that process unfolds, the original depth can fade while only the surface details remain. You remember that something felt important. You remember that something felt important. You remember being moved by it. Yet the deeper meaning behind that feeling becomes difficult to reach. While you are trying to make sense of it, the moment that required a response continues moving forward, and eventually the opportunity exists only as a memory rather than a choice. So far, we have identified the patterns that create these missed moments. We have explored the inner posture required to receive what is already present. We have looked at the story of Elisha's servant and the way perception changed everything. We have also walked beside Rachel and seen the quiet sorrow that can follow when understanding arrives after the window's passed. Now the conversation begins to turn in a different direction. Understanding the problem matters, but understanding alone is not the destination. The next step is learning how to recognize these moments while they are happening, how to develop the awareness that allows you to respond in real time, rather than only looking back with clarity after everything has already unfolded. That is where we begin building what could be called true setup literacy. The ability to recognize a meaningful opening while you are standing inside it. To sense what is unfolding before the moment slips into hindsight, and to meet it with the kind of receptivity that allows its purpose to be fully received. What I am about to share is not meant to remain in the realm of ideas. These are not concepts to admire from a distance or insights to agree with and then forget. They are practical habits, simple enough to be repeated and powerful enough to change the way you move through the moments that matter. Each one addresses a different way people miss what is unfolding right in front of them, and together they build the kind of awareness that allows you to recognize a meaningful opportunity while you are still standing inside it. The first practice is what I call the stillness interrupt. When something enters your life that feels significant, resist the urge to immediately evaluate it. Before you analyze it, seek advice about it, or begin sorting it into categories. Give yourself 30 seconds of complete stillness, not to force an answer, not to search for a feeling, but simply to create a pause between the arrival of the moment and the reaction that usually follows. That pause matters more than most people realize. The mind naturally wants to reach conclusions as quickly as possible. It is efficient, fast, and constantly trying to make sense of what it encounters. Yet, there is another layer of awareness that often moves more slowly, one that needs space before it can fully register what has arrived. 30 seconds may seem insignificant, almost too simple to matter. Yet, many important moments are lost because people move directly into evaluation before allowing themselves to truly receive what is present. The opportunity itself may not have required a more sophisticated process. It may have required a brief moment of openness that never occurred. When people describe this experience, they often struggle to find the right words. Some notice a sense of spaciousness, as though the question remains open rather than being rushed toward an answer. Others feel a quiet warmth, a gentle weight in the chest, or a subtle certainty that appears before logic has fully caught up. The description varies, but the experience carries a similar quality, a deeper awareness making itself known before analysis takes control. That awareness is often drowned out when conclusions are reached too quickly. The moment is categorized, filed away, and interpreted through old patterns before its full meaning has a chance to emerge. The stillness interrupt creates room for something deeper to participate before the familiar mental processes take over. The second practice is the signal journal. Whenever you experience one of those moments of recognition, when something inside you responds before your thoughts begin explaining it, write it down. Do not record your conclusions or your analysis. Capture the signal itself. Write what you sensed, what you felt, where it appeared in your body, and what it seemed to be pointing toward before your mind started evaluating it. This practice is powerful because memory changes over time. Once analysis begins, the original experience is often rewritten. Doubt reshapes it. Fear reframes it. Old disappointments reinterpret it. What felt clear in the moment can later be dismissed as imagination or wishful thinking. A signal journal preserves the experience before those revisions occur. It becomes a record of what you actually sensed rather than what you later convinced yourself you sensed. Over time, patterns begin to emerge. You start noticing recurring themes, familiar signals, and moments where your deeper awareness recognized something long before your analytical mind approved of it. Many people have spent years questioning their own inner knowing, not because it was unreliable, but because it was repeatedly overridden. Every time a signal appeared, it was immediately subjected to scrutiny, until confidence gave way to hesitation. Eventually that inner voice became quieter, not because it disappeared, but because it learned it would not be trusted. The signal journal gently reverses that pattern. It is less about recording spiritual experiences and more about gathering evidence. As the record grows, trust begins to grow with it. You develop a relationship with your own awareness that is grounded in observation rather than assumption, and that changes something instruction alone cannot change. The third practice is what I call the setup assumption. Of the three, this is often the most challenging because it requires a shift in perspective rather than a specific action. It means moving through your current season with the working assumption that something meaningful is already being arranged, even if you cannot yet see the whole picture. This is not about forcing belief or convincing yourself of something that feels artificial. It is about adopting a posture that changes what you notice. Instead of constantly asking whether anything important is happening, you begin paying attention to how the pieces may already be connecting. Your focus shifts from proving the process exists to observing how it might be unfolding. The questions themselves begin to change. Rather than asking whether a moment is significant enough to matter, you become curious about what is being built through it. Rather than searching for certainty before taking a step, you begin looking for what the present moment is asking of you. That shift creates a different relationship with time. Urgency loses some of its power because you are no longer measuring progress against expectations or external timelines. You become less focused on how fast things are moving and more focused on participating faithfully in what is unfolding. This way of seeing is far from passive. In many ways, it requires greater attention. You begin noticing connections between events that once seemed unrelated. You become more aware of how one conversation leads to another, how one closed door redirects you towards something unexpected, and how seemingly ordinary moments may belong to a larger sequence already in motion. The setup assumption does not invent meaning where none exists. Instead, it helps reveal what may already be taking shape beneath the surface. What once appeared random or insignificant begins to stand out differently, and the opportunities that were hidden by constant evaluation become easier to recognize for what they truly are. I want to invite you into something simple before we continue. Rather than thinking about these ideas from a distance, take a moment to experience them for yourself. Pause for a few seconds and allow yourself to become aware of what is happening inside you right now. Set aside the need to decide whether this message fits your situation or whether every part of it makes sense, and simply notice what has been quietly present while you have been listening. Pay attention to whatever stands out first. Maybe there is a heaviness somewhere in your body, a sense of warmth, a subtle pull, or an awareness that appeared before your thoughts began explaining it. Perhaps there is something you have been carrying beneath the surface that has remained present throughout this conversation, waiting to be acknowledged. Whatever you noticed, allow it to remain there for a moment without rushing to define it. The goal is not to force an answer. The goal is to stay with the experience long enough to hear what it may be communicating. Many people immediately move into interpretation, but there is value in holding the moment open. Sometimes the deepest insights emerge when you stop demanding conclusions and simply allow awareness to remain present. What matters most is understanding that meaningful opportunities do not require perfect certainty before they can be received. They often require openness, attentiveness, and a willingness to stay present with what is unfolding. Receptivity is not something reserved for a select few. It is a capacity that can be strengthened over time, even after seasons of pressure have made it more difficult to access. If something surfaced during that pause, take a moment to acknowledge it. Describe what you noticed before the explanations arrived. Focus on the experience itself, rather than your conclusions about it. There is something powerful about naming what is present, especially when others are learning to do the same. Many people spend years feeling isolated in their uncertainty, believing they are the only ones wrestling with these experiences. Yet when individuals begin speaking honestly about what they sense, that isolation starts to loosen its grip. What once felt private and confusing becomes easier to recognize, and awareness grows stronger through shared understanding. Before moving further, there is something important to recognize. Every practice we have discussed depends on a certain level of openness and attentiveness. When a person has been carrying intense pressure for a long time, that openness can become harder to access. The practices still help, but they may feel more difficult because the internal environment supporting them has been strained. Imagine teaching someone how to swim while the water level keeps dropping. The technique itself remains valid, but the conditions make it difficult to experience the full benefit. In much the same way, prolonged stress can gradually affect the ability to remain open, aware, and responsive to what is happening beneath the surface. This matters because many people blame themselves for their inconsistency. They wonder why moments of clarity seem brief, why certainty fades, or why they repeatedly find themselves standing at the edge of change without fully stepping into it. Often the issue is far more complex than a lack of effort or commitment. Research into the human brain has shown that different forms of processing work best when they function together rather than separately. One aspect of the mind excels at analysis, logic, and rapid evaluation. Another contributes intuition, context, creativity, and a broader awareness of what is unfolding. When these capacities work in harmony, people are able to perceive situations with greater depth and balance. In that state, there is less pressure to force immediate conclusions. A person can remain present with a possibility long enough to understand it more fully. They can sense the difference between reacting from habit and responding from deeper awareness. What feels difficult during periods of strain often feels much more natural when those internal capacities are working together. The challenge is that extended stress tends to narrow attention over time. Responsibility, survival mode, constant demands, and ongoing pressure can push people into a way of functioning that prioritizes speed and efficiency. Nothing is wrong with them. Their intelligence remains intact. Their desire remains intact. Their desire remains intact. Yet the broader awareness that allows them to stay connected to deeper signals becomes quieter. This is why some people experience moments of profound clarity that seem to disappear almost as quickly as they arrive. They catch a glimpse of something meaningful, but struggle to remain connected to it long enough to act from it. The insight is real, yet maintaining access to it becomes increasingly difficult when life has trained the mind to remain in a constant state of vigilance. Over time, many begin operating with only part of their natural capacity available to them. Modern life places enormous demands on attention, energy, and emotional endurance. Constant stimulation, pressure to perform, and the weight of unresolved concerns gradually pull people away from the deeper awareness that once came more naturally. For someone who feels called towards something greater, this can be especially frustrating. There may be a sense that more is available, but there is a deeper level of clarity waiting to be accessed, yet reaching it feels inconsistent. The longing remains, the desire remains, and the sense of purpose remains. The challenge is learning how to reconnect with the openness that allows those things to be received and sustained. There is a difference between sensing that your life is moving towards something meaningful and being able to stay connected to that awareness every day. Many people carry a deep conviction that they are being led somewhere important, yet they struggle to access that same clarity consistently. The gap is not always a matter of desire, sincerity, or commitment. Often it feels like something inside knows the direction, while another part struggles to remain connected to it long enough to move with confidence. I have heard this described in many different ways. Some people say they can understand the truth of what they believe, but they cannot seem to feel it fully anymore. The words still make sense, the hope is still there, and the desire to move forward remains alive, yet something feels distant. It is as though they are standing near a source of water. They can see clearly, but they cannot quite reach it. Others describe a different kind of exhaustion. They have spent years carrying responsibilities, supporting people around them, and holding everything together through difficult seasons. Somewhere along the way, they became so accustomed to living under pressure that they stopped noticing how disconnected they felt from their own inner life. What once felt vivid and alive gradually became quieter, thinner, and harder to access. One of the most important things to understand is that prolonged pressure changes the way a person experiences clarity. When life demands constant attention, immediate solutions, and continuous problem solving, the mind naturally adapts. It becomes highly skilled at analysis, evaluation, and survival. Yet the deeper awareness that helps a person recognize subtle guidance often receives less space to be heard. This is why moments of certainty can sometimes appear and disappear so quickly. You may recognize something meaningful, feel a deep sense of knowing, and then find yourself unable to reconnect with that same clarity a short time later. The experience can be confusing because the knowing felt real when it arrived. What changed was not necessarily the truth of what you sensed, but your ability to remain connected to it. Many people mistakenly interpret this pattern as a personal failure. They assume they need more discipline, stronger faith, or a better method. Yet there are seasons when the issue is far less about effort and far more about learning how to create space for the deeper parts of yourself to participate again. The longing for clarity remains. The signal is still present. What often needs restoration is the capacity to stay open long enough to receive it. If the stories and patterns we have explored in this message feel familiar, then perhaps the invitation is not to judge yourself more harshly. Perhaps it is to become more curious about what has been happening beneath the surface. The moments that seemed inconsistent may have been revealing something important all along. The flashes of insight, the quiet knowing, the subtle recognition that appeared before the analysis began may deserve more trust than you have given them. What matters now is remembering that awareness can be strengthened, receptivity can be cultivated. The ability to recognize what is unfolding in your life is not permanently lost because of a difficult season. There is a part of you that still recognizes truth when it appears, still responds to what is meaningful, and still knows how to receive what has been prepared for you. The journey forward begins by making room for that part of yourself to be heard again. Before we reach the end of this message, there is something important I want you to carry with you. The opportunity God has been preparing for you is not a single fragile moment that disappears forever if you fail to recognize it immediately. Life does not unfold through one narrow doorway and then close permanently behind you. Yet every season carries its own unique combination of timing, relationships, readiness, and circumstances, and those combinations are not always meant to remain unchanged forever. What is available to you right now belongs to this season of your journey. The shape of it, the people connected to it, and the lessons surrounding it are part of a specific moment in your story. Future seasons will carry their own invitations, but they will not necessarily look exactly like this one. That is why learning to recognize what is unfolding while it is still unfolding matters so deeply. There are opportunities that only make sense when viewed from the other side. In the moment, they often appear ordinary, almost easy to overlook. Yet later, when you look back, you realize that a conversation, a decision, a quiet prompting, or an unexpected turn was carrying far more significance than you understood at the time. Those are the moments this message has been pointing toward. As we come toward the close of this conversation, I want you to think about where you were when you first arrived here. Maybe you are in the middle of a long season of preparation. Maybe you are standing at the edge of something you have been reaching toward for years. Or maybe you are simply tired, carrying the quiet exhaustion that comes from investing your heart into something meaningful without yet seeing the breakthrough you hoped would come. Perhaps there have been nights when you questioned whether all of this effort was leading anywhere at all. Perhaps you have watched other people move ahead while your own path seems slower and less visible. Maybe you have wondered whether the silence meant nothing was happening. If so, I want you to know that these questions are more common than you realize among people who are in the middle of significant transformation. Whatever brought you here, this message was never meant to place another burden on your shoulders. It was meant to help you see your journey differently. The struggle was not proof that your effort was wasted. The waiting was not proof that you were forgotten. What you have been experiencing has meaning, and the obstacles that seemed confusing can be understood more clearly when viewed through a different lens. If you stayed with this message all the way to this point, there is something I believe about you. You have continued walking through a process that required commitment, long after many people would have stopped. You have followed what felt true to your spirit even when doing so cost you comfort, certainty, or immediate results. And somewhere along the way, you experienced moments of clarity that felt deeply real, even if you struggled to hold on to them. Those moments were not evidence that something was wrong with you. They were reminders that there is a deeper awareness within you that still recognizes what is true. The challenge was never that the signal failed to arrive. The challenge was remaining connected to it long enough to act from it. You have known what it feels like to glimpse something important and then watch the certainty fade before you could fully move forward. Yet the clarity itself was never the problem. The knowing was real. The quiet recognition that surfaced beneath your thoughts was real. What matters now is learning to trust that experience rather than treating every moment of uncertainty as evidence that you imagined it. I want to speak directly to the question many people carry in silence. You have wondered whether all this preparation is actually leading somewhere. You have questioned whether the waiting has purpose, or whether you have simply been circling the same ground for longer than you expected. The answer this message has been building toward is simple. The preparation is leading somewhere. Growth is not endless delay. Formation is not an endless holding pattern. There comes a moment when what has been developing beneath the surface begins to reveal itself, and the seasons that once felt hidden start making sense in a way they could not before. The opportunity is real. The movement is real. The next step is closer than it may appear from where you stand today. What has been growing in the dark does not remain hidden forever. Seeds spend a long time beneath the soil before anyone sees evidence of life above the surface. Yet the unseen season is never empty. It is where roots deepen, where strength develops, and where the foundation is formed for what eventually becomes visible. Much of your journey has been taking place in that hidden space. Take a moment now and allow yourself a brief period of stillness. Let everything you have heard settle beyond the level of analysis. There is a part of you that recognized something in this message long before your mind began evaluating it. That deeper awareness has been listening from the beginning. What you notice in that quiet space matters, not because it provides instant answers, but because it reconnects you with something that has been present all along. The knowing you have touched in brief moments throughout your life has not been misleading you. It has been pointing towards something real, even during seasons when you struggled to trust it. The quality of awareness you experience in those moments is not foreign to you. You have felt it before. It appeared in flashes during periods of preparation, in moments when everything suddenly felt clear, and in times when your spirit recognized something meaningful before your thoughts could explain why. The invitation now is simply to remain present with it longer. You do not need to force certainty. You do not need every question answered before you take the next step. Sometimes, the path becomes visible through movement rather than observation. Sometimes understanding grows as you walk. The purpose of this moment is not to eliminate mystery. It is to help you trust what has already been placed inside you. And so, I want to return to the words that opened this message. When God said no, it was not a rejection. It was protection. It was a refusal of every pattern, but has kept you standing at the edge of what was meant for you. It was a refusal of the doubts, distractions, old wounds, false urgencies, and familiar fears that have repeatedly convinced you to step back when it was time to move forward. The reason that no matters is because there is also a yes. The opportunity is real. The preparation has meaning. The movement already happening in your story is not waiting for perfect certainty before it begins. It is asking for openness, awareness, and the willingness to respond when the moment arrives. Say these words out loud if they resonate with you. I see the setup. I release the trap. I cross through. Let those words be less about performance and more about recognition. Let them remind you that you now have language for experiences that once felt difficult to explain. Let them also remind you that you are no longer looking at your story through the same lens. What once appeared as delay may have been preparation. What once appeared as confusion may have been formation. What once appeared as a closed road may have been a redirection guiding you toward a better entrance. Remember this as you move forward. Preparation is not abandonment. A closed door is not always rejection. Sometimes what appears blocked from one perspective is actually guiding you toward the exact passage you were meant to find. The ability to recognize that difference grows stronger when you learn to trust what is unfolding instead of rushing to dismiss it. And if part of you is still wondering whether this message was truly meant for someone like you, pay attention to that thought. The voice that says this applies to everyone else, but not to you is often the same voice that has kept you standing outside opportunities that were already opening. Recognizing that pattern may be one of the most important insights you take from this conversation. You are not trapped in an endless cycle because you lacked worth or because you were somehow less prepared than everyone else. You are moving beyond that cycle because you are beginning to see what has been hidden beneath it. The moments that change a life are often more specific, more personal, and closer than they first appear. If this message connected with you, leave a comment and share which of the 5 patterns felt most familiar in your own story. Tell me what you noticed during the moments of stillness. Tell me what stood out before your mind began analyzing it. The more honestly we speak about these experiences, the easier it becomes for others to recognize them as well. Share this message with someone who has been questioning whether their season of preparation is leading anywhere. Someone who has grown tired while waiting for movement they cannot yet see. Sometimes a single insight arrives at exactly the moment it is needed, and sometimes that insight becomes the beginning of an entirely different chapter. And if you choose to continue this journey, stay connected for the next message. This conversation is not ending here. It continues from this point forward, and I look forward to meeting you there as someone who no longer sees only the waiting, but also recognizes the quiet movement already unfolding beneath it. Come as the person who sees the setup, trusts the process, and is finally ready to step through the door that has been opening all along.